Hello, thank you for joining me today. My name is Laura Luther with the Michigan Public Health Institute, and I'm here to talk to you about implicit bias. We're going to briefly discuss what implicit bias is, why it's so important for us to address, and ways that you can recognize your own biases so you can be more intentional in the work that you do. Implicit bias is a form of bias that occurs automatically and unintentionally that nevertheless affects judgments, decisions, and behaviors. While that was a helpful definition, it doesn't quite describe how our implicit biases are formed in the first place. And the reality is that our implicit biases are shortcuts that our brain has created to better process the amount of information that we're taking in every single day. We're taking in information through our lived experiences and even information that we gather through our media sources, including the news that we watch and the TV shows and movies that we enjoy. It processes that information, turns it into data, and basically puts a label on it so that when we are in a situation in the future, it doesn't have to go through that process again. It pulls out that shortcut and applies it to our future judgments and decisions. The important thing to remember about our implicit biases is that they're automatic and they're unintentional. So when they happen, we don't necessarily realize that we're being influenced by our past experiences. You may often hear implicit bias referred to as unconscious bias, and that's because it is happening unconsciously. Now, it's almost that time of year again where the weather's warming up and we can open up our windows and get some fresh air. So I want you to imagine for a second that you're at your Health Equity Council meeting in person and you decide to open the windows because it's a beautiful summer day outside. But as soon as the meeting starts, a big bee comes flying in and starts buzzing around your heads. Take a second and think about what are your first reactions or thoughts when you see that bee come in. Are you imagining it to be a specific type of bee that's causing you to be alarmed or maybe not worried at all? If it's a honeybee, would you be less scared? Or if it's a wasp, maybe you're running for the corner or halfway out the door by the time that bee gets to you. And that might be based off of a past experience that you had where a wasp stung you real bad and you're never ever going to be around them again. That experience shaped your judgment and behavior without you necessarily realizing it, which is what an implicit bias is. Now, it's important for me to note that if you saw that bee come flying into your meeting and your first reactions were, I hate bees, I don't care what type of bee it is, I hate all bees, I hate them, does not matter. That is no longer implicit bias. Those become your explicit biases or your prejudices that you hold. You are consciously aware, it is very clear to you that you do not like or you hate bees, and nothing is going to change your mind. While having an implicit bias towards bees is pretty harmless, it does have the potential to be harmful to others. And this is especially true when our implicit biases are based off of another individual's race, gender, age, sexual orientation, and more. And because of this, it can actually create barriers for them to achieve equity. Your role on the Health Equity Council gives you the opportunity to create change within your community. If your implicit biases are influencing your judgments or your behaviors in this role, it can actually be harmful to your community members. Our implicit biases also make it difficult to build meaningful relationships and partnerships with others. If we're carrying assumptions about others without really getting to know them, it makes it difficult to really understand who they are as a person and work with them effectively and in a meaningful way. Knowing what your biases are and why they exist can help you be more intentional in building relationships that are authentic and allow you to create opportunities that are equitable for all in your community. I want you to take a minute and really think about that idea of equity in your community. What is your Health Equity Council doing to make sure the opportunities that you create are equitable for everyone in your community? So take a minute and really reflect on that. Now that we've discussed what our implicit biases are and why it's so important to address, let's begin to look at how we can recognize our biases. One of the first steps that we can take is to dedicate time to reflect on the self. Reflect on your past and present behaviors and ask yourself questions like, what automatic assumptions have I made about someone in the past that turned out to be wrong? Where did that assumption come from? Are there judgments I've held about a certain group of people that turned out to be wrong? For example, younger or older people, maybe men or women, or even someone of a different race or ethnicity than you. The more that we take time to reflect on the biases that we hold and why they exist, we can better recognize when our implicit biases are happening in real time. Another step that we can take is to participate in the Harvard Implicit Association test. They offer a number of tests to measure different biases that you may hold and provide you with results at the end so that you can analyze and really start to, again, reflect on why maybe you hold those biases. Oftentimes, when you take a test, you'll find that your conscious beliefs and values don't align with the results that you received. And this is why it's so important to dedicate this time to really understand where our biases come from, so that as we continue to do work, we can ensure that they aren't influencing our judgments and behaviors in the future. Thank you all for joining me today as we briefly discussed implicit bias and why it's so important to the work that we do. If you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to check out the Health Equity Council Padlet and find our Implicit Bias Guide located under the Resources tab. In this guide, you'll find a number of activities, including reflections and questions, as well as some additional resources if you're interested in doing some more exploring. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for tuning in.